Hi there, everyone. I missed you. Did you miss me? All right. I apologize. It's just now that I have provided another video for you insofar as education is concerned. But now let me provide you another important discussion about the most essential learning competencies. And this time, unpacking of the most essential learning competencies will be provided in the field of mathematics because it is where which I am the education program supervisor in our division. And so allow me to share with you my presentation. What you can see as my presentation is called from the orientation provided by the Bureau of Curriculum Development of DepEd Central Office, and it is also provided for the mathematics teachers in our department in the division of Pampanga. So why do I consider to provide you an unpacking and a briefer for most essential learning competencies in mathematics? I think this is also an important element that we have to understand as teachers in order for us to plan, prepare, and further implement the teaching and learning engagement for this new learning delivery modality that we anticipate this coming school year 2020-2021. And so the focus of this discussion are boiled into two. Okay, we have to discuss the rationale behind the streamlining of competencies and how unpacking or integrating of competencies was done. And of course, to clarify gray areas or issues to deepen teachers' understanding, skills, and confidence in the implementation of the learning delivery this coming school year. But I'd like to emphasize that this is prepared for the mathematics teachers. It's also applicable to some extent for other learning areas, but the examples to be given and then the competencies to be presented are in the field of teaching mathematics. Okay, so as a starter, I know for a fact that um, you have already joined or attended virtual webinars which talk about the unpacking of the most essential learning competencies. And how do we go about the most essential learning competencies? Uh, how do we give birth into the most essential learning competencies? As I said, with the thorough, comprehensive discussion you have um, received from your supervisors, from your DepEd officials, from our DepEd Live. Okay, I assume or I greatly believe that you have strong, okay, understanding of the most essential learning competencies, especially so that it is also one of your sessions in your learning delivery modality course 2, specifically your module 2. However, still, it is my task to share the most essential learning competencies briefer and its unpacking in the turf of my learning area. And just to reiterate that it is for what I think and what I believe very essential at this point in time. And of course, prior to the implementation of these learning delivery modalities, we experienced the birth pains of planning and preparing for it. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact our schools and the economies around the world, even in the Philippines, the current global health crisis poses a profound impact on our basic education system. Why? Because around the world, we have 87% or 1.5 billion learners who were affected by school closures. And in the Philippines, we have 27 million learners who are affected. However, we in the department under DepEd, whether private or public schools, ensure the welfare of these 27 million learners, for them to really be provided with the quality learning. So it is our commitment from the top level management down to the grassroots, down to our teachers, down to our community stakeholders to really make, no, education for all happen. Because according to UNESCO 2017, education cannot wait. If learning stops, we will lose what we call the human capital. Despite the VUCAD world that we are experiencing right now, the vulnerability, the uncertainty, the complexity, ambiguity, and now disruptive health crisis brought about by the COVID-19, we at the basic education sector, we make sure that learning continues. And this is dubbed by what we call the DepEd's Sulong Edukalidad framework. Now, even before the time of pandemic in 2019, early 2019, there had been a series of review of our K-12 curriculum regarding identifying the essential learning competencies. And because of the pandemic and the shortened school year, we make it a point that even though there is a short time frame for the delivery of education for this school year, DepEd, is working on the premise of identifying the most essential learning competencies. Okay? From the essential learning competencies dubbed down to the most essential learning competencies. And in determining the criteria for the selection of these most essential learning competencies, there had been series of consultation with DepEd curriculum experts and external stakeholders like the assessment, curriculum, and technology research services in terms of identifying high consideration on what determining factor must be considered. And the primary determining factor considered is the endurance towards our learning competencies. Now, what does it account for in the field of mathematics? How does most essential learning competencies really was applied or was integrated or was dubbed in mathematics K-10 curriculum? Okay? Identifying the learning competencies in the mathematics K-10 curriculum must satisfy the criterion endurance. Okay? And this criterion endurance posits the most essential learning competencies that necessitates the realization of what we call the twin goals in mathematics. And what are those twin goals in mathematics, my dear mathematics teachers? Yes, of course, it is critical thinking and problem solving. Of course, these are skills that need to be honed by our learners for real life experience application. In order to succeed in life, these twin goals are the most essential skills that they need to acquire. Laying the foundational concepts and skills at each grade level are, of course, pivotal in what we call the learning progression of our learners. This somehow or shall scaffold learners' understanding and acquisition of what we call the higher order thinking skills. Now, these identified most essential learning competencies in math put premium in the development of the numeracy skill. In application into the real life situations, in fundamental practice, basic practice, practical understanding of the concept, rather than being concentrated in the what we call content knowledge. And on the development of higher order thinking skills, we go beyond procedural fluency or what we dubbed as instrumental understanding. We take into consideration conceptual understanding. And by doing this, it is followed that we have to really look into the content domains that we articulated or as articulated in our curriculum. And what are those content domains that are very familiar among math teachers? Of course, we have the numbers and number sense, geometry, patterns in algebra, measurement, and statistics and probability. Now, similarly, the skills and processes to be developed and emphasized in the curriculum are also maintained. These include knowing and understanding, estimating, computing and solving, visualizing and modeling, representing and communicating, conjecturing, reasoning, proving and decision making and applying, and connecting. It is further aimed, of course, that values and attitudes of accuracy, creativity, objectivity, perseverance, and productivity, these are also strongly honed among our learners, especially at the crucial time of health emergencies. The use, of course, of the instructional resources or appropriate tools such as manipulative objects, measuring devices, online calculators, computers, smartphones, and tablets ensure appropriate use with respect to age and grade level of the learners. These are likewise encouraged but not compelled to have. Meaning to say, even in the absence of computers, smartphones, tablets, internet connection, we make things happen for our learners to really learn. The content or the skills and processes and the content domains, integrating values and attitudes, appropriate values and attitudes, using, of course, the learning resources that are needed for this teaching and learning engagement to take place. Okay? Now, the value of mathematics as a learning area should not be confined in the four walls of our classroom. So the absence of face-to-face interaction or classroom instruction is not really a problem. Okay? Its application to real-world problem should be dealt with depth and breadth in order to create meaning so that our students can really realize the importance of math in their lives. Hindi lang siya pang classroom instruction, kundi for real life application. And so they really make meaning of what math is about in their day-to-day experiences. Again, teachers are our instructional leaders, and so they should be deeply informed on how to identify the most essential learning competencies, thereby being used in order for them to plan for their learning development plans or individual monitoring development plans. Okay, so in so far as most essential learning competencies is concerned, from the very start that I've mentioned that there had been a curriculum review from the learning competency in our K-12 curriculum guide, the DepEd identified the essential learning competencies. And from those essential learning competencies, further figured out the most essential learning competencies. And so how was this undertaken? Okay, this was undertaken in consideration to these different activities. First was the mapping of essential and desirable competencies, and then identifying the prerequisite knowledge and skills within the learning area. And of course, the analysis of interconnectedness of prerequisite knowledge and skills among learning competencies across learning areas, considering that we are in spiral progression. Okay, so going back, what do we understand or how do we understand the mapping of essential and desirable competencies? From LCs to most essential learning competencies, we talk about essential learning competencies in the terms that these are what the students need, considered indispensable to building skills, to equip learners for the next grade level and for lifelong learning. Meaning to say, the competencies which are non-negotiable, which are the competencies that are really to be taught to our learners. But when we talk about desirable learning competencies, these are the learning competencies that may enhance education but may not be necessary in building foundational skills. These are for enhancement. And so, if essential learning competencies are non-negotiable competencies, desirable learning competencies are considered for enhancements, or what we call the add-ons, to strengthen the, the skills honed, which are essential skills. And so, because of this, we have to make use of the essential, we have the DepEd was actually able to identify which are essential and which are desirable. They are able to map which are essential and which are desirable using the determining factor, which is called endurance. What is endurance? It is a, it is including a determining factor, or it is under a determining factor endurance when the LC remains with learners long after a test or unit or study is completed. Meaning to say, it is a skill that is essential for them to apply in their day-to-day undertakings, or from the very beginning that they have understood it until they grow applying it. Okay, and if it is useful beyond a single test or unit of study, such as research skills, reading comprehension, writing, map reading, hypothesis testing, these are essential in many professions and in everyday life. Of course, numeracy is one of them. And so, because of this, okay, owing to the fact of having the determining factor, which is endurance, curriculum reviewers have to identify which learning competencies need to be retained, merged, rephrased, and draft. Okay, a learning competency is retained if it satisfies the endurance criterion and it contributes to lifelong learning and a prerequisite skill to the next grade level. A competency is merged if it is a two or more learning competencies that have the same objective or learning intention are combined into one comprehensive learning competency. If it is merged, then it has to be rephrased. Okay? Rephrasing to make the statement of the learning competency more concise and specific. And the learning competency was dropped if that is too specific, recurring, and of course, subsumed in another learning competency. So these are the considerations. Okay? It is retained when it passes an endurance criterion. Competencies are merged when two or more learning competencies have the same objective or learning intention, which can be combined to a more comprehensive learning competency. And if it is merged, it has to be rephrased to make the statement concise. And a learning competency is dropped if it's too specific, recurring, or subsumed in another learning competency. So let us take an example. Under curriculum review of grade 2, second quarter, numbers and number sense, we have the learning competencies, or the LC 24, visualizes, represents, and subtracts 2 to 3 digit numbers with minuends up to 999 without and with regrouping. Okay. Similarly, with 25, 26, and 27 competencies, they are essential. Take a look at the learning competencies. All of these, 24, 25, 26, 27, are all falling under essential competencies. However, to provide us this from the essential learning competencies to the most essential learning competencies, we identify what action must be undertaken. So as you can see, our learning competency 24 visualizes, represents, and subtracts 2 to 3 digit numbers with minuends up to 999 without and with regrouping is retained. Why? Because it satisfies the endurance criterion. On the other hand, learning competencies 25 and 26 subtracts mentally one-digit numbers from 1 to 3-digit numbers without regrouping using appropriate strategies, and subtracts mentally 3-digit numbers by tens and by hundreds without regrouping using appropriate strategies. They were merged, and because they were merged, they have to be rephrased. It was rephrased this way. Subtracts mentally the following numbers without regrouping using appropriate strategies. That is, for 1-digit numbers from 1 to 3-digit numbers, and 3-digit numbers by tens and by hundreds. The reason? These learning competencies are related and they can be harmonized or unified into a more focused developmental skill. Okay? And then 27, learning competency 27 is retained because it satisfies endurance criterion. Okay? So as you can see, although all of them are essential learning competencies, there had to be a series of another look in so far as understanding which are to be retained, which are to be merged, and later on rephrased. Okay? There are also competencies that were dropped. Let's take a look at curriculum review for the second quarter numbers and number science learning competencies 28, 29, 30, and 31. As you can see, creates problems involving subtraction of whole numbers, including money, is a desirable competency. Going back to our discussion a while back, we have two considerations in terms of our learning competencies. One is essential and one is desirable. So essential is meaning it's a non-negotiable competency, which means to say it has to be there. It has to be taught. And when we say desirable, it's an add-on. It's for enhancement. Okay? So in this case, 28 and 31 are considered desirable learning competencies. Not necessarily essential, but desirable, meaning it's an add-on. It's an enhancement. It's an enhancement learning competency. And so, having 28 and 31 as desirable and 29 and 30 as essential, you can see here below that 29 and 30 learning competencies were retained because they satisfy the endurance criterion. Of course, we drop down those which are desirable. Another example is under curriculum review of grade 6 and the fourth quarter measurement. We have ALC 70, 71, 72, 73, 75, and 76, which are essential learning competencies. And we have 74, creates problems involving surface area and volume of solid space figures with reasonable answers. And 77, creates problems involving electric and water consumption with reasonable answers, which are dubbed desirable learning competencies. So what do you notice? So kung mapapansin niyo, yung mga may create problems na behavioral terms, yun yung tinatawag nating desirable. We are talking, sabi nga namin, nagbibiruan kami. Kasi nga naman, in a real life situation, we really teach our learners not to create problems, but to provide solutions to problems. So that is one way of thinking about that. No? They're not supposed to create problems, but they are supposed to put solutions into issues and concerns. Okay? And so, as you can see, so LC 70 was retained because it satisfies the endurance criterion. 71 was dropped derives the formula for finding the volume of cylinders, pyramids, cones, and spheres. Why? Because this learning competency is more of teacher's action. Remember the learner-centered learning. Okay, this is more of a teacher-centered activity because it's really the teacher who derives the formula, okay, and teach them to our learners. And then 72, 73, 75, and 76 were retained because they satisfy the endurance criterion. And this is one examples that I'd like to reiterate, of course, especially so that this is in grade 1 for the first quarter under numbers and number sense, wherein you can see here visualizes and represents numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials, counts the numbers of objects in a given set by ones and tens. They are merged and then later on rephrased into visualizes, represents, and counts numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials and methods. Why? Because LCs 2 and 8 are subsumed in lesson competency or learning competency 1. These may be subtasks. So learning competency 8 is counting by 2s, 5s, and 10s. Okay, so it was dubbed into one learning competency visualizes, represents, and counts numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials and methods. Okay, so when most essential learning competencies were sent out to the field by the central office, I've already advised, no, during the time when the opening of the school year was not yet moved to October 5, I've already informed our teachers, principals, and other district supervisors to inform as much as possible our parents during the time of enrollment and during the time of orientation and consultation with parents and other guardians and siblings to while waiting for the opening of the school year and while our teachers are planning and preparing for the school year, they must already be practiced in how to count as much as possible concrete objects, because the very first learning competency that they will encounter in grade 1 is already this one: visualizes, represents, and counts numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials and methods. When we say visualize, they can already see using sense organs. They can touch, no, sense organs. Represents, okay, they can see drawings. And of course, count is already an abstract. So what strategy is the teacher thinking in order for this to really take into place in the teaching learning engagement? They might probably use the concrete representational abstract approach in teaching for this particular learning competency, which they can plan with their weekly home learning plan. Okay, so much for that. We have learning competency number 4, composes and decomposes the given numbers. This is removed or dropped, because this competency is repeated in another quarter, specifically the 3rd quarter algebra. 6 and 7 were merged and rephrased because they are related and may be harmonized for a more focused development of the skill. Okay, so how do we use the MELCs in math? How do we unpack the most essential learning competencies in math? Of course, while you were preparing your weekly home learning plan, you have to have your MELCs and of course your previous K-12 curriculum guide, okay? Because we are flexible. We think of the consideration of flexibility and feasibility in planning for the teaching and learning engagement, especially in the new learning delivery modality. So the first consideration is you have to appraise the content standards in each quarter of your grade level. So specifically in the first quarter, you have to already plan for your weekly home learning plan, appraise the content standards. What do our learners must be able to know and understand? These are the content standards in each quarter. These will guide you in tracking the learning content and focus, okay, as per individual quarter, or what do we have to focus as per quarter. So after appraising the content standards, you now plan the instructional activities based on the performance standard. So you have to design the activities and the tasks suited for the type of learning delivery modality that your school will use. And of course, you have to contextualize the instructional task whenever necessary. Again, we take into consideration feasibility and flexibility. We have to make our primordial concern the level of understanding and the environment of our learners, okay? The existing environment of our learners, okay? And then third, after planning the instructional activities based on performance standard, you have to examine the identified MELCs for each quarter. Sabi nga po dito, time allotment is flexible. Even if there was allotted week 1, week 2, week 3, up to week 10 or week 9, you have to consider the time allotment in terms of flexibility and feasibility in order for your teaching learning engagement to happen. The MELC is the learning goal for the quarter. However, if there is the need to subtask the MELC, you can do it in such a way that you chunk all of your learning goal in order to really provide what is essential to our learners. Okay? What is the priority in math? The development of math skill is prioritized over competence on content knowledge. We are not more of memorization of concepts, but we are on the practicality of the application of the concepts. And then later on, design activities, assessment tasks dealing with problem solving and analysis. In the learning delivery modality, modular distance learning, which take into account the highest percentage in terms of the learning delivery modality chosen by our schools, we provide them self-learning modules. And these self-learning modules are made for independent learning. That's why they have answer keys at the back, so insofar as making our learners check on their progress and ability to understand the lesson based on answering the formative activities provided there, formative assessment provided there. But it is essential for our teachers to design another set of activities and assessment tasks to really identify if our learners are able to grasp understanding, the necessary skills that they need to acquire for a specific lesson. So our teachers will now design activities and assessment tasks that will serve as an evaluation in order for them to really identify if our learners learn. They can use authentic assessment, okay, traditional or non-traditional assessments as well. So for the comparison of the number of LCs in original CG or curriculum guide down to determining the essential learning competencies and break them down into the most essential learning competencies, we have the following chart. For grade 1, from current CG 66 to 62, we are now down to the 38 learning competencies for our MELCs. Grade 2, from 93 to 74 to 54 LCs in MELCs. Grade 3, we have from 80 to 73. Now it's down to 57 learning competencies. Grade 4 from 86 to 74 to 67. From grade 5, we have 107 current learning competencies in CG, which is down to 88, now 74. And then grade 6, from 89 to 71 to 62. From grade 7, from 64 to 63, now 53. Grade 8, from 57 to 57, now 52. Okay? From grade 9, imagine, from 48 to 48, now 46. Only 2 learning competencies were dropped. And from grade 10, we have from 51 to 47 down to 40. So as you can see in this chart, having the blue color as the learning competencies retained, the red color as the learning competencies merged and then rephrased, and then the learning competencies which were dropped are in green. You can see the highest percentage of retained were in grades 9 and grade 8. And of course, grade 4 and grade 7. Okay, the least competencies dropped are of course in grade 9 and grade 8. Okay. Now, I'd like to provide you a walkthrough, not necessarily a walkthrough, but a run-through of the most essential learning competencies in our key stages of learning development. Okay, for key stage 1, we talk about grades 1, 2, and 3. So here is the learning competencies, most essential learning competencies for quarter 1. We have the duration from weeks 1 to 9. So quarter 1 is within the time frame of 9 weeks, and these are the most essential learning competencies. When you unpack your most essential learning competencies, you derive your learning objectives based on understanding the content. In here, we have demonstrate understanding of the whole numbers up to 100. And so, with this, our learners, okay, must recognize and represent and order whole numbers up to 100. That is why your first learning competency is visualizes, represents, and counts numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials and methods. So, visualize, they know already, and they can represent because they understand. This is comprehension, knowledge, comprehension, and application, count. Okay, so that is how you unpack. You have to understand the content, what is the skill, necessary skill and process to be performed by our learners, okay? And then form your activities. Gather the learning resources you need in order to teach, okay, this learning competency. So how did this happen? How did it come to be that we have these competencies, these most essential learning competencies in 9 weeks time? Of course, as mentioned before, there are learning competencies which are dropped, retained, merged, and then further rephrased. And so, in this example, in grade 1, first quarter, we have LC 1, 2, and 8 were merged and rephrased because these LCs 2 and 8 are subsumed in LC 1 and they may be subtasked. When we say may be subtasked, you can provide it into chunks. You can you can subtask it because it is subsumed in this learning competency. Okay, for learning competency 4 was dropped because, as I mentioned before, it is repeated in patterns and algebra third quarter. Then learning competencies 6 and 7 were merged and then later on rephrased into this competency. Why? Because these LCs are related and can be harmonized for a focused development of the skill. Okay, again, in grade 1 first quarter, 12 and 13 were merged and rephrased because they are related and can be harmonized into a more focused development of the skill. And then 14 and 15 were merged and then later on rephrased into this learning competency because of the same reason. Okay, I'd like to reiterate that I only provide the most essential learning competencies for the first quarter. But in the description section, I will be providing a copy of my full length presentation or complete presentation from first quarter to fourth quarter from grades 1 to senior high school. Okay. Then for math grade 1, quarter 2, this is your most essential learning competencies, which covers 8 weeks. Okay, and these are the most essential learning competencies, what were dropped and retained and rephrased. So for grade 1, wait lang. Umulit po siya. Okay, for grade 1, second quarter, we have LC 27 and 36, 21, 22. They were dropped because of the reason that they have this behavioral objective, which is creates problems. So, because this is more of a teacher action and does not meet the endurance criterion. Okay, same with 18, 19, 20, 23, 24, and 25. These learning competencies were merged into one and rephrased into this learning competency, particularly because they are all related and can be unified into a more focused development of the skill. And LCs 24 and 25 are subsumed in learning competency 19, where appropriate mental techniques in adding numbers are presented. So, umuulit lang siya. Grade 1 second quarter, LC 30, 31, and 33 were merged and rephrased, having the similar reason that they can be harmonized due to its relations. Okay? Then uses the expanded form to explain subtraction with regrouping, which is LC 32 was dropped. Why? Because it is already in LC 33. Okay, math grade 1, quarter 3. Okay, what were deduced? Okay, 39, 40 were dropped. No, were merged and rephrased because of the reason of its relationship and can be harmonized. 41 and 42 were merged and rephrased as well. And the reason is because they are related and may be harmonized, unified for a more focused development of the skill. Okay. 48 and 49 were merged and rephrased. For math grade 1, quarter 4, okay, these are the actions taken. 58, 59, 60 were merged and rephrased because they are related and can be harmonized into one developmental skill. And the statistics and probability, 61, 62, 65, 66, all were dropped, okay, because they are not age appropriate for grade 1, as they are still to master reading and writing skills. And of course, there are recurring LC that can be found in grades 2 and 3. These are all can be harmonized into one developmental skill in grade 3. This is math grade 2, MELCs. Okay, these are the most essential learning competencies for weeks 1 to 9. And these are the actions taken. LC1 and 2 were merged because LC2 may be subsumed in LC1 and may be subtasked. 7, 8 were merged into this competency because they are related. 9, 10, 11 were merged and rephrased into this learning competency because of the same reason. Okay, 16, 17 were merged and rephrased because they are related. 18, 19, 20, 21 were merged because of the same reason. And 23 creates problems involving addition of whole numbers including money was dropped because it's more of a teacher's action and it does not meet the endurance criterion. Okay, this is math grade 2 quarter 2. And then in grade 2 quarter 2, LC 28, 31, and 42 were dropped because of, okay, it's more of a teacher's action. Creating problem is more of a teacher's action and it does not meet the endurance criterion. 25 and 26 were merged and rephrased because they are related and can be harmonized into one developmental skill. 32 and 33 were merged and rephrased because of the same reason. 34, 35, 36 are merged and rephrased because of the same reason as well. Yon. 39, 40 merged and rephrased because they are related and can be unified into one focused developmental skill. Okay, this is math grade 2 quarter 3. This was the action taken. Similarly, with the reasons behind. Grade 2 third quarter, mapapansin nyo po, 61, 60 to 68. Okay, except 67 were dropped. 65 retained because this meets endurance criteria. Math grade 2 quarter 4. Okay, these are the actions taken for the most essential learning competencies. Grade 2 fourth quarter. Okay. And then we have math grade 3 quarter 1. Okay. What were dropped in first quarter in grade 3? LC 16 and 22 because of this reason. 5 and 6 merge and rephrase because of its relationship. 8 and 9 merge and rephrase because it could be harmonized into one developmental skill. Yan. 13, 14 merged and rephrased. 19, 20 merged and rephrased. This is math grade 3 quarter 2. These were the action taken. You can just read. Okay. This is math grade 3 quarter 3. Math grade 3 quarter 4. Yan. Okay. Now we go on to the most essential learning competencies in KICH stage 2, which is grades 4, 5, and 6. So similarly, okay, the curriculum reviewer were able to identify the learning competencies, the essential learning competencies that were retained and merged and rephrased, and those the desirable competencies that need to be dropped. Okay, so here you have this grade 4 first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. Okay, grade 5 quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Math grade 6 quarter 1, actions taken for MELCs, second quarter, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Okay, for junior high school, we have math grade 7 quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Grade 8 quarter 1, okay, have quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Math grade 9, quarter 1, quarter 2. If you did not see any action taken, meaning to say there were no competencies that were dropped. Okay. Quarter 3, and then quarter 4. And then math grade 10, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. These are the most essential learning competencies in senior high school math subjects. Here, from Gen Math, from the current CG, we have 63 learning competencies down to 58 to 54 for the most essential learning competencies. Statistics and probability from 71 to 65 to 37. From our business math from 45 to 35, pre-calculus from 49 to 30, and basic calculus from 39 to 33. So you can see in statistics and probability, most of the learning competencies were dropped. From 71, it was reduced to 37, as could be gleaned in this chart. Okay, so with blue color being the retained competencies, red being the merged and then rephrased, and then green being the learning competencies dropped, you can see general mathematics is the subject where most of the learning competencies were retained, and it is in the statistics and probability where most of the learning competencies which were dropped. Okay. Okay, this is general mathematics quarter 1, quarter 2, statistics and probability quarter 3. See, all were dropped. Quarter 4, quarter 1 in business math, quarter 2, quarter 1 in pre-calculus, quarter 2, basic calculus, quarter 3, and quarter 4 for basic calculus. Statistics and probability for quarter 3 and quarter 4. So, umulit lang po siya. Okay, there you have it. And so, with the discussion provided to you, I'd like to share the last part of my presentation, which is quoted from our former President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt, who once said, whenever you are asked if you can do a job, tell them, certainly I can. Then get busy and find out how to do it. Meaning to say, for my reflection for this quotation is, whenever we are faced with these roles and responsibilities that we need to prepare and plan for, especially when it comes to preparing the tomorrow of our learners, the future of our nation, we have to have this positive mindset that whatever it is, all shall come to pass. And with us working together, working as one, we can achieve the best outcomes and outputs possible. Thank you very much, and I hope you learned from this discussion, specifically our mathematics teachers of our public education and also private education. Maraming salamat.